Good morning, everyone. We are tackling this morning the subject of praying for the Pope and the Mishebeirach for Cholim. As we begin on Tuesday, March 4th, there's been a number of reports that Pope Francis has been battling health issues for the last few weeks. We'll look at a couple of headlines that will set us on a conversation and discussion about the idea of the Mishebeirach for Cholim, the prayer for those who are in need of a recovery, the prayer for the sick, which is included in many congregations when the Torah is read or on Shabbos and the like. And source number one from a couple of days ago may even be a little bit outdated. I saw overnight that the Pope had a couple of respiratory emergencies over the course of the evening, but I think things are similar as they were in source number one. Pope Francis remained in stable condition and did not suffer another respiratory episode a day after having an isolated crisis of bronchospasm that worsened his previously improving medical condition, the Vatican said. Still, the Pope's doctors at Rome's Gemelli Hospital said his prognosis remains guarded. With the crisis, February 28th, the 88-year-old Pope Francis began receiving non-invasive mechanical ventilation, a treatment that delivers air with added oxygen through a tightly fitted face mask using a positive pressure to assist breathing. But by March 1st, he was able to alternate between mechanical ventilation and high-flow oxygen therapy, administered through a nasal cannula. The Vatican said in its evening medical bulletin. March 1st bulletin also stated that the Pope has continued to eat, and the Vatican source confirmed that he could still eat solid foods even after the previous day's bronchospastic crisis resulted in an episode of vomiting with inhalation. He is not receiving intravenous feeding. The source said the March 1st bulletin also said that the Pope has continued to eat, and the Vatican source confirmed that he could still eat solid foods. Okay, he's not receiving intravenous feeding. There's a little bit of a duplicate in the copying of the source. In any event, the Pope's not doing so well. We are the condition continues to be closely watched, obviously, by all Catholics, and they're praying for him. And we continue to watch what happens. I don't know. There was a movie that was nominated for the Academy Awards, Conclave, about what happens after the Pope passes and a new Pope, and I'm sure that's on some people's minds also. What's going to be? What's going to be? Well, source number two, Buddhist, Jewish, and Muslim faith leaders offer prayers for the Pope's recovery. Okay, so there are prayers being offered from everywhere, from all faiths, for the Pope's recovery. This is from the Catholic Herald last week. As Pope Francis remains hospitalized in critical condition fighting a complex respiratory infection and pneumonia in both lungs, prayers for his recovery, and wishes of support are coming from different religions and interfaith groups around the world. In addition to the more obvious sources of support in the Catholic Church, the likes of Buddhist, Jewish, and Muslim faith leaders have offered prayer for the Pope's recovery. The votes have been joined by those from the wider and lesser known reaches of the Church, such as the patriarchs of Catholicism, Eastern churches, as the whole world follows the drama around the 88-year-old Pope and his health that is unfolding in Rome. On 25 February, an interreligious prayer service was held for the Pope at the Mahabodhi Buddhist temple in Colombo, Sri Lanka, where he visited in 2015. After the Pope's admittance on 14 February to the Gemelli Hospital, Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople was among the first to send his well wishes, writing in a handwritten letter that he was praying for Pope Francis' quick return to his important and sacred duties. Imam Yahya Sergio Yai Pallavicini of Mecca has also praised the Pope as a champion of dialogue between Christians and Muslims, while Noe Di Segni, president of the Italian Jewish community, said Francis's voice and actions are a key reference point for interfaith dialogue in all of humanity. Cardinal Bechara Boutros Pierre Rai, patriarch of the Antioch of the Maronites in Lebanon, a religion I hadn't really heard of, has prayed for Pope Francis publicly, asking that the Lord help him and grant him healing, also knowing that he has prayed for the pontiff privately. The Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Cardinal Pierbattista Pizzaballa, who many consider to be papabili, meaning a candidate to be the next Pope. We learned a new word. Wrote a letter asking faithful to come together as one family in faith and unite in an urgent appeal for Pope Francis' health and well-being. As a spiritual family, we are called to stand together, united in prayer and supplication. So we have the Pope's condition is concerning, and we are seeing prayers from all different corners around the world. And yes, as Hirsch noted, he'll have a Jewish doctor. For those who heard my sermon last week, we know that everyone wants a Jewish doctor. So there's a situation. We have someone who is ill, seriously ill, in need of prayers coming from everyone. What is the Jewish response? And the Mishebeirach for Cholim, I would imagine people here are on various WhatsApp groups, and they'll sometimes get an unsolicited WhatsApp to pray for someone, or maybe you're on a Tehillim group WhatsApp that is praying for people. And that's saying Tehillim is one thing. It's Mishebeirach for Cholim. We pray for healing and health every single day in the Shemona Esrei. Rafa'enu Hashem v'nei Rafeh. In many Sidurim, there is a small little Yehi Ratzon that can be added, and people can add prayers for sick individuals, as it says, B'soch Sha'ar Cholei Yisrael, among all the other sick of Israel. Are we praying just for Jews? Are we praying for individuals? Also, you'll notice in many Cholim lists, we have it in Arshal, others included also, you have people's names. What name? It's often the name of the mother, the person's Jewish name and their mother's Jewish name. What if they don't have a Jewish name? What if their mother doesn't have a Jewish? What if they're a convert? There's there are a number of directions that this can go. I think certainly instinctively we feel that we, just like God is a healer, we want to do what we can to heal others as well. But how did this Mishebeirach for Cholim come about? I think that instinctively, if someone is in need of our prayers, we'll pray for them. At the same time, do we have to? Are there people we shouldn't pray for? What is the nature of that prayer? Should we drop everything and pray every time we hear of someone? Do we put it into our prayer services? Do we have to delineate? Why does God need to hear about Avraham ben Sarah? Why can't we just mention the person's name? Why can't we just think about the person? How did all of this develop? And we'll take a look at some sources. I think that what we're going to sketch out is that we're going to see that there's this generic or general outpouring of prayer which can be looked at, which seems to have a source, this idea that when we are in need, we pray, and in particular for healing. We'll see that it becomes a little bit more specific and organized and analyzed through a rabbinic and Jewish practice lens. And then maybe we'll go back out and see that it's, that really at the end of the day, the goal is to do whatever we can in whatever format, whatever text, whatever language, and the like. Before we begin, any questions, comments, or reactions to the presentation of praying for the Pope and the Mishebeirach?
Sometimes we pray like what I just wrote to you, Vayakam Pope Chadash Asher Lo Yada et Yosef, that we worry what will come next.
Right, I think that would probably be less part of the Mishebeirach for Cholim. But for example, if you want to on your Cholim list, if you're listing names, do you list Francis Ben? It's not really his name. Does God understand the alias? I think that we're going to look more specifically at that than the question of the geopolitics of the new Pope, or what the role in praying for that is. Yes, I see Miriam hand.
Yeah, so I was at a Shabbos lunch where there was a guy from Israel. His kids are in the army, his grandchildren. He is, I'd say, like an American intellectual, made Aliyah about 45 years ago. And the hate and the cursing that he had for the Pope was unbelievable.
Yeah.
But with knowledge, this is a man who speaks all over the world.
Right. I think that, recently the Pope's comments have not been much appreciated and have been, quite, anti-Israel. And I think, look, I grew up with the grandfather that anytime the Pope would appear on TV, I early in my childhood remember the expression "Missa Machina," which is the very quick recitation of the words Misa Mishuna,
Misham.
which is that he should die an excruciating, strange death. So there's this sense, look, the Vatican during World War II, during the Holocaust, there certainly is, there's ample reason for distaste, to put it mildly, for the Pope and for the Catholic Church. There have been some more positive developments, Vatican II in the 1960s, the role that, allies and, people of faith are generally, we have, possibilities for, some alliances. But I hear it. I think that look, do we pray for our enemy's death? That's kind of tricky. It's also an appropriate topic to raise on Parshas Amalek. We have enemies, and real enemies have to be destroyed. And so I think that I can understand someone's anger and even hatred towards the Pope. I know that in when the Pope's comments last couple of months, I guess go back December, January, when some of the comments came out or released by the Vatican that seemed very one-sided and critical of Israel. My initial reaction was I got to call Cardinal Dolan and yell at him. I was told that they have the two don't really coordinate on foreign statements. No, but it's kind of there's the general topic of when we hear someone is sick, do we say Tehillim for them? Do we include them in our Mishebeirach? Some people have really, really long Mishebeirach lists. Is there a can we just say everyone who's sick should get better? And when do we be more specific? And I think that part of it will depend on one's personal investment or relationship in an individual. If you're good friends with the Pope and his passing will leave a personal sadness, or his absence, his illness creates personal sadness, that's different than the sympathy we feel in general when hearing that someone's not doing well. So I think that will get explored as well when we see how the Mishebeirach for Cholim evolved. So I would imagine that here as we explore the subject, some people are feeling more sympathetic and hope he gets better, and some people are channeling my Opaz Misa Mashina. So let's look at the sources. So Bamidbar 12:13, Vayitzak Moshe Hashem Lemor El Na Rifana Allah. Right, this is when Miriam and Aaron had been speaking about Moshe and about Moshe's wife, and Miriam is stricken with saras. And Moshe just says, heal her now, oh God, I pray thee. This is the essence of the Refuah Shalema, the prayers. And the Gemara in Brachos comments here, source number 4, Rabbi Yaakov said that Rav Chisda said, anyone who requests mercy on behalf of another need not mention his name, as it is stated, please God, heal her, please. And he did not mention Miriam's name. So we have the Moshe's declaration for Miriam to be healed, that if a person is requesting mercy for someone else, the name is important, is not important. You don't have to mention the name. Make it better, God. Now, one of the things that's mentioned, the Gemara Brachos says, anyone who is mevakesh rachamim, right? So it doesn't necessarily mention specifically that you're asking for refuah. It's talking about praying on behalf of someone else. And it's interesting that this idea of praying for refuah is incorporated into our Shmona Esrei Refaenu, which our Shmona Esrei daily prayer emerges from the Anshe Knesses Hadola, the men of the Great Assembly, the rabbis who were starting to put more ritualized Judaism together in the period of the Second Temple, so going back 2,500 years. But we don't really have this idea of a very specific mention of the Mishebeirach for Cholim. We know the idea of prayer. El Na Rifan Allah is a declaration. The rabbis understood that as when you're asking for mercy for people for whatever, you don't have to mention names. And when it comes to specifically how to engage those who are ill, really what we have is Bikur Cholim. We have visiting the sick. We don't have praying for the sick. The Torah makes the pivot, quoting some of the medieval commentaries in source number 5. It's a great mitzvah to visit the sick, since while doing so, one can pray for mercy for them. And this is akin to resurrecting them. He uses the language of mechayeh otam. Also, when seeing them, one may seek ways to assist them with any of their needs and try to help them. So really, Bikur Cholim is the mitzvah. The various assistance and prayers that can happen, or praying for them, is an outgrowth of Bikur Cholim. This could also be why, as we'll see, that maybe that name isn't necessary, because if you're visiting someone who is sick and you decide to pray for them, well, you know who you're praying. Everyone knows who you're praying for. You're praying for the person in front of you. You don't have to mention their name. And so it seems that it's this Bikur Cholim which started things out. So prayer for the sick. The idea of praying for the sick has an origin in Bava Basra, where it's not praying for the sick, it's going to someone else to pray for them. Bava Basra 116a. But Pinchas Bar Chama interpreted the verse homiletically. Anyone who has a sick person in his home should go to a sage, and the sage will ask mercy on the sick person's behalf. And it stated, the wrath of a king is as messengers of death, but a wise man will pacify it. Pasuk in Mishlei and Proverbs, the idea that you don't pray for the sick, you go to a wise person to pray for the sick. So it seems that you have kind of two models of prayer for the sick. One, visit the sick. When you visit them, you may be inspired or feel the need to pray on their behalf, which does not require mentioning their name. Or you're looking for an intermediary, and that intermediary is the wise man based on the verse in Proverbs, and you should go to the sage. The Meiri, commenting on that Talmudic teaching, source number 7, Ochola b'soch beso, oechad mine hatzara. So you have someone who is sick or in pain or any other type of trouble. Yelech etzel chacham, go to a wise man. V'yilmod heimenu darchei hatfilos v'yivakesh rachamim. So the Meiri says you go to the wise man to ask them how you should do the prayer. So the Meiri, we're talking the 14th century already, is the one who starts saying, okay, there's a mechanism to pray, and going to the wise man is for you to know what to say. So the Meiri is kind of also empowering the individual, not just the wise person to pray, but to learn how to pray. Now, this idea of utilizing the wise person, the chacham, opens up a whole discussion. It reminds me of the comment that Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein made about that. There was a time 500-600 years ago, if someone was ill and seemed to be in dire straits, right? There was no doctor, there was no prescription. You davened, and so the approach, was often very more instinctively spiritual, as opposed to today, where it's instinctively scientific, medicinal. Because thank God we live in a modern era where there are cures and medicines and those types of options. But if you go back a couple hundred years, this idea, in terms of Jewish religious history, you had the idea, like the Gemara in Bava Basra says, you would go to the Chacham. If you move it into the realm of the 16th century, you'd go to the Kabbalists. You move to the 17th, you move to the 18th century, you go to the Hasidic Rebbe. And this became something that even rose to the level of being being recognized as having a certain level of efficacy that people would want to make sure to go for it. So Rabbi Shalom Mordechai Shwadran, running in the 19th century, is talking about someone who is dangerously ill. People who are believers in the power of the righteous to heal. That maybe they could travel on Shabbos and violate the Shabbos biblically in order to go to the righteous to invoke their prayers. And it talks about a story. There's a kamiyah that Rabbeinu Peretz Kosaf kamiyah liyosheves al mishpar b'Shabbos, that he wrote an amulet for a woman who was having difficulty giving birth on Shabbos. Writing on Shabbos is a biblical violation. Gam haramah hitir l'to kamiyah b'Shabbos. The Ramah allowed this, to have an amulet written on Shabbos if the person who was writing them was known to be reliable. His amulets were known to be effective, and but it has to be someone who is at the end of line 3 calls that it has to be someone who's a righteous individual who's been proven effective in their prayers or in their petitions or their amulets. And then he talks about a story. Uvda Yadana. There's a story that's known. Be'ir Moladati Bizlacha. It was in Zlacha. Shahaya Cholim Misukan. There was someone who was very dangerously ill. Who Osasman Hayamor Rabbi Agon or Shemal Viskas the bells. Right? Meshuvasi Shabbos Kodesh Brud. So the Belzer Rebbe was in Brud. He allowed the Dayan, the rabbinical judge, to have a non-Jew write the name of the sick person and his mother, Shem Hacholev Imo, Vishalach Lebrud, and he would to send it to the Rebbe in Brud. And he was very upset. Shlomo Kluger was very upset at this Dayan and says, "You're no longer qualified to judge because you told the non-Jew to write the sick person's name to go get it to the Rebbe." But the Belzer Rebbe in Yisrael and he said, well, basically the Belzer Rebbe took responsibility and said, well, if this is going to happen and that the Dayan is going to lose his position because he had a non-Jew write the name to bring the name to me on Shabbos, I have to make sure the person gets better. Because if the person is ultimately healed from that Sabbath desecration or the rabbinic Sabbath desecration, that would be terrible. And that's what happened. The person who had been sick, whose name was brought to the Rebbe after having the rabbinical court judge instruct the non-Jew to write the name on Shabbos, got better. And the Maharsham says, but Ein Lahakel, Prapidor, is that we really shouldn't be lenient, especially in our generation, for all sorts of reasons. That's why, B'Shabbos, Himelizo, we say on Shabbos and Mishebeirach for Cholim, which we'll explore in a minute. Shabbos is not a time for calling out for healing, but hopefully it'll be a time for mercy. So this was the story. This is already 19th century. They're talking about the effective role of the tzaddik, and in the story that took place, Shabbos was violated in order for the person's name to be written down. There was opposition to that happening. The Rebbe took it upon himself to quell that opposition by healing the person, and that's what happened. Right? These, sometimes they say about Hasidic stories, they may or may not be true, but they don't tell these stories about me and you. And so that's maybe what happened. So questions or comments on this development? Again, starts with Moshe. El Narafa Na'ala. Comes out that there's the idea of Bikur Cholim is the time to do whatever we can, or if we're motivated to pray for them, we just do so. And then you have the idea of invoking the Chacham, either the Chacham to pray, or the Meiri, a little bit more rationally, the Chacham to provide advice on what we should do. But we do see that this developed into this quote-unquote industry of righteous prayers on behalf of the sick individual, even so much so as violating Shabbos if such efforts have been proven to work. Questions or comments?
Yeah, so how would we feel about this today, knowing what we know about medicine? Let me say it another way. Obviously, as you said, nowadays we're going to go find the best doctor we can, but of course, never underestimate the power of prayer. But to be so certain that the prayer or this specific act that they did about writing on Shabbos in that story that you said was the thing that healed the person, it's a little, I don't want to say difficult. That's not proper of me, but how do you reconcile that? How do you explain that?
Well, I think if you ask the question, you're probably not going to reconcile that. There's a different level of faith that different the different approaches that can be taken. Clearly, Rav Shwadra, the Maharsham, is writing about going back into the period of the 1200s, 1300s, where there was less medicine, and maybe that's when these Kamiyas were being written. Up until the 1800s, the Hasidic rabbis, the shtetl didn't have the medicine we have today, so there could have been more that reliance, on the spiritual side of things. I think the Maharsham even says at the end, we Nowadays, we're not going to be lenient for all sorts of reasons. And I think some of those reasons are that we're not living our lives based on that level of faith anymore. The first call is often to the doctor not to be added to the Mishebeirach list. So I think that we live in a more rational times and a more scientifically, medically advanced times, which make some of the which call to mind the Meiri, right? The Meiri was understood the Gemara and Bava Basra not to go just to learn how to daven, but to learn how to what to do to make the person better. And I think that that's one way to look at it. This is, if we're looking at we're looking at the development of our prayers on behalf of those who are sick. This played a big role. The Maharsham also references, and we'll look at how the Aruch HaShulchan presents it. The Mishebeirach LaCholim really became the go-to or the default. I think that the mechanics and the text and the way we do it, as we referenced that we say B'so Shar Cholei Yisrael, and the fact we say on Shabbos Similizo. These were all, we created a template and we crafted a procedure. We don't just, like I said at the beginning, we don't just say El No Rafan Allah, we create a Mishebeirach, right? And we invoke the patriarchs, and we invoke Moshe, Aaron, David, and Shlomo, right? And in Sfardim they invoke the matriarchs. So we've created our own spiritual ladder for trying to evoke the blessings of healing. Because we're not instinctively turning to the spiritual realm anymore, but we want to do something. So let's look at the Mishebeirach for Cholim. The Aruch HaShulchan talks about it, because he starts, he presents kind of a halachic formula and says that it shouldn't just be get well soon, which does, of course, in my in my Seinfeld hat. There is a episode where they have afternoon cakes for getting well soon, and they have a get well soon song. But we don't just say get well soon. Source number 9. If you're davening for them, not in their presence, you should use Hebrew. You don't want the angels to understand. The angels, you want to go to prayers directly to God. You can pray in any language because the divine presence is there in the room of the person who is ill. And when you're asking God, well, you can speak in any language. If you're asking the malachim, then you have to make sure that you speak the appropriate formula and language. The prayer, you should include this sick individual you're praying for among all the sick of Israel. Like Hamakom Yerachem Alecha B'Soch Shar Cholei Yisrael. That if you want, you don't have to say Hom Mishebeirach, but you can say about this person there that God should have mercy on you as he does among all the other sick of Israel. It's better to pray for more people. Praying for more people is better than praying just for the individual. It's harder for God to reject if you're praying for so many people. And on Shabbos, you have to say, Shabbosim Melizok Refuah Krova Lavo. On Shabbos, you're not supposed to pray on behalf of someone. So we say we're praying on behalf of someone, but we're not praying because on Shabbos we don't pray before someone. Right? This is kind of the prayerful equivalent of the Nish Shabbos Geret expression, right? Nish Shabbos Geret means we don't talk about it on Shabbos. On Shabbos, you don't talk about what you're going to do after Shabbos. So if Shabbos was over, because we don't talk about it on Shabbos, this is what we've been doing. That's kind of like the caveat. So here too, we're praying for mercy, but on Shabbos we don't pray for mercy. So this is not praying for mercy. And that is that also becomes part of the prayer for the sick on Shabbos. So El Na Rafan Allah, has now morphed into mechanics and concern for the right language and concern for the right expression. So Cholim Israel, if you're saying it on Shabbos, you should make sure you're saying it's not on Shabbos, a time for praying for mercy. One of the things that people catch on from this halacha quoted by the Aruch HaShulchan is, if you say B'so Shar Cholei Yisrael, he should be healed among those who are sick among the Jews. Well, then how do you pray for someone who's not Jewish? How do you pray for the Pope in a Mishebeirach? That's B'so Shar Cholei Yisrael. Unless you mention the Pope name specifically, you can mention Jew number 1, Jew number 2, Pope number 1, and amongst all of the ill of Israel. But it, it definitely highlights the particularistic aspect of these Jewish prayers, which for some is grates against a modern sensibility, but that's not really the case. Often prayers are religious prayers are for a particular faith community. Same way Christian prayers will invite, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, which, is not something we're going to pray with or about. There's nothing wrong with Jewish prayer focused on this. Some have said that, you can just pray for, if you want to just pray for all sick people, you can do that too. But it seems that the Mishebeirach for Cholim, from the, in the Jewish liturgy, developed a more particularistic bent like the rest of the prayers. But who says you can't include a non-Jew? Question would be, as we become more specific, how do you include a non-Jew? What name do you mention? Right? We see the Aruch HaShulchan beginning to talk about what you should say and how you should say it. We saw the idea of invoking the name, right? And we invoke the idea of a person who is the son or daughter, and mentioned the mother's name. Where does that come from? So it comes from something we say in Tehillim. We say it every Rosh Chodesh at least, right? Source number 10. Ana Hashem ani avdecha ben amosecha. Right? I am your servant, the son of your maidservant. David HaMelech modeled this idea of at momentous times invoking his mother, not his father. And this sets off a whole series of questions. Let's say you don't know the Hebrew name. Let's say you only know the father's Hebrew name. So just a contemporary author wrote an article about using the mother's name in source 11. Ideally, Jewish names should be used for prayer. If, however, only the mother's non-Jewish name is known, it should be mentioned as in Ben or Bat Elizabeth. In a case when the person's mother's name is entirely unknown, the ill person's name should be appended with Ben or Bat Sarah, referring to the matriarch Sarah, who's the mother of all Jewish people. Right? Sometimes people want to know, what do I say if I don't know their mother's name? So this author mentions just take the Sarah as the matriarch of all. Same way we give a convert the Hebrew name of Ben Avraham V'Sarah or Bat Avraham V'Sarah. Some would say just stick in the English name. God knows it all. But the idea, we see that this has taken on kind of a life of its own. The mother's name has a very strong Jewish tradition dating back to Tehillim. If you don't know the mother's Jewish name, to use the mother's English name or Sarah, okay, that has a little more flexibility, because again, this was not really part of a Talmudic mandate of having the Mishebeirach for Cholim. Now, when it comes to the idea of praying on behalf of non-Jews, we do have reference to assisting non-Jews and visiting the sick for non-Jews, and that's Gemara in Gittin, source number 12. Remember, we said at the very beginning that the Talmud doesn't talk about necessarily praying for the sick. It talks about going to the wise man to pray for the sick. But the Talmud does talk about visiting the sick and then doing what's necessary to help them. So it does seem that we might be visiting the non-Jewish sick, which might lead to us praying for them. The Gemara Gittin says, the sages taught, source 12, one sustains poor Gentiles along with poor Jews, and one visits sick Gentiles along with sick Jews, and one buries dead Gentiles along with dead Jews. All this is done on account of the ways of peace, darchei shalom, to foster peaceful relations between Jews and Gentiles. Right? There's an idea that we have to, if we need to be sensitive to the fact that if we only do nice things for Jews and not for non-Jews, that could create a situation where the non-Jews wouldn't like us very much, or like us even less than they already did. So for darchei shalom, we have a responsibility to be of assistance in these ways. So, all right, so you have visiting the non-Jewish sick. Visiting the non-Jewish sick may lead to pray for the non-Jewish sick. We have a reference to the idea of praying on behalf of non-Jews in a case mentioned by the Sefer Hasidim, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, 1100s, source 13. A Jew who sends a non-Jew on a faraway mission. Right? Let's say you have a non-Jewish employee you send away in business, is allowed to pray for his safe return. You kind of say tefillas haderech on his behalf and hope he comes home safely, because if the non-Jew doesn't return alive, the Jew's going to get blamed. Right, so there's kind of a little bit of self-interest, but Rabbi Yehuda Chassid says you can pray for the non-Jew. You can pray specifically for his return, because if not, they could cause trouble for the Jewish owner or for everybody else. So these sources are invoked by subsequent rabbis and halachic decisors to open up a channel on praying on behalf of non-Jews and praying, including Mishebeirach and non-Jews and the like. And in particular, this it was encapsulated in the question that was asked from a convert. A convert was asked if he's allowed to daven for his sick non-Jewish father. Right? Can he say Refuah Shalema, pray Mishebeirach, or saying Kaddish after he passes away when the time comes? So this is source number 14, and this is Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, and it's the middle of the second line. Tshuva, Kasam Shulchan Aruch Yerodeh, Ovdeh Avodah Aser Latzilim Natulamus. Right? There's this idea that you're not supposed to save idol worshippers. You're not allowed to heal them. In Lo B'Makom Eva, unless there's a chance they'll hate you. Right? This is the whole the idea that on some level there was a tremendous amount of apathy towards idolaters, and the rabbinic law was not meant. The directions for violating Shabbos or for healing were not supposed to be done towards idolaters, unless there's a danger that it would come back negatively for the Jewish nation. It's a whole interesting discussion in terms of they present kind of maybe a difficult philosophical moral question, the equivalent of the trolley question. Another trolley question: if a train is barreling towards 5 people, can you divert the train so it only kills 1 person? Right? These are kind of extreme situations, because why not just untie them? There's not enough time to untie them, whatever the case is. But that's a complicated situation. Train is going down to 5 people tied to the track. You can turn it so only 1 person will get killed. Are you allowed to do that or not? Right? That's called the trolley question. According to Jewish law, no, because you're not allowed to do anything that leads to the killing of an individual. So sometimes Jewish law would say do nothing. So I think kind of a Jewish equivalent of that is, they talk about saving the idolater, violating Shabbat to save the idolater is only allowed if there's going to be Ava, if there's going to be hatred towards the Jewish community for letting the non-Jew die. So what if you're on a desert island and no one's going to know? Do you still have to save? Are you still allowed to, or do you have to save the non-Jew? That's a complicated moral dilemma that has been addressed in the approach that has evolved over the generations. The Mishpatei Uziel, Rabbi Uziel, former Sephardic Jewish rabbi of Israel, says that a lot of that is shaped by the interaction between Jews and non-Jews, and the answer today would be different than it was 1,000 years ago, but for another time. But that's how you have a law in the books of Shulchan Aruch about not violating Shabbat to save the idolater, not healing the idolater. So others have written that, what about the Rambam? Right? The Rambam was a doctor. The Rambam healed non-Jews. So Rofei Yishmaelim Be'eretz Mitzrayim, Nish'ena Yishmaelim of the Avodah Zarah. The Muslims are not idolaters. It's only real idolaters you're not allowed to save. And someone who doesn't worship actual idolatry, you're allowed to heal them. And even if you're not worried, if no one's going to know, you're just allowed to. If they're not idolaters. And then Rabbi Ovadia Yosef concludes, even Christians are idolaters. Mutar l'rafosam, you're allowed to heal them. Even just not going to be worried about negative blowback. And you can pray for their recovery. And so we've kind of gone from not addressing the issue at all to having this carve out from you can visit them, you can pray for them so that it won't lead to negative consequences on the Jewish community, to recognizing the reality that, of course, you can pray to heal them. And then in praying for a non-Jew, we mentioned the person's name along with his or her father's name. Right? The non-Jew, we follow the father, and the Jew, we follow the mother. Why? Because David HaMelech said, Ani avdecha ben amasecha. the Jew, we follow the mother, so the non-Jew would follow the father. Again, some would just say invoke the name of the person, have them in mind also helps. I think that a lot of this, can be motivated by something, a comment, Gemara that Rav Aaron Lichtenstein also invokes, source number 16. Rav Bachin Nasavas in the name of Rav. Anyone who can ask for mercy on behalf of another does not ask is called a sinner. As it says, following Samuel's rebuke of the people, as for me, far be it from me, I should transgress against the Lord and ceasing to pray for you, but I will teach you the good and the right way. Had Samuel refrained from prayer, he would have committed a sin. The idea that we should be looking for opportunities to be helpful, and that, maybe just like we began, Moshe just said, El Narafan Allah. Sometimes there's, our role is to find ways to alleviate suffering in, whatever way we have the opportunity and possibility. The question of including the Pope in a Mishebeirach, there's lots of sick people we should be included. There are people I don't know about who are sick. So it's I think that each of us should be on the lookout for the opportunities that we have to make some form of spiritual or even physical difference, and recognize that if you have a chance to do something good for someone else and you don't, that's really where we fall short, and we are designated as a sinner. Does this mean we have to spend 45 minutes every morning thinking about every single possible sick person? Not everyone has the time for that, but we should always be on the lookout for alleviating the suffering. I think that's where Moshe started with El Narafan Allah. Jewish tradition, as it always does, then creates a whole matrix or framework for, slotting it in and when and where and how and this and that. And sometimes can you violate Shabbos for certain types of treatment and not, or prayers of the righteous, right? That's natural outgrowth, but ultimately it all comes from trying to do the right thing. And if you have the opportunity to do the right thing and don't, Nikra Chote, that's where we're falling short. And in the merit of all this learning, may all of those who are in need of recovery be able to find, may God send refuah and health and blessing to everybody according to their needs.
Amen.
Amen.